To my grandson, Robert Warren, and to my granddaughter, Lynn, to my great-granddaughter, Robbie, and great-grandsons, Robert and John. Thank you so much, Robert, for your tape recording received here. I believe it was the latter part of April, almost at the end of April, and to hear and to get the news of and from you. You speak concernedly about the farm down there, and believe you me, I feel that you are living closest to the earth and living far better than anyone else, barring none. You have fresh vegetables direct from the garden, home-grown, home-cooked by a wonderful wife. The table is always filled with the very, very best that can be had. And since you are living down there, I'm telling you it's a different life that you live as I live up here. It was only here the other day that Helen called upon me the 5th day of May. She brought with her her son, my grandson, Niels Clinton. He's a wonderful and a fine-built young man now, at the age of 30. He came here primarily with Helen for the purposes of going to the Custer Battlefield National Monument, where his grandmother, Ella Dixon, is buried. We finally got there to the cemetery, and it is a beautiful spot. It is filled and filled and filled again. It's surprising to see the number of people that are passing and dying from this way of life. Naturally, on our return back into Sheraton from Crow Agency, we stopped at several different places to have a dinner. And you know the prices are so extreme. I told Helen, I said, no, I'm not going to pay no $21.50 for 2 steaks with just a dish of salad and a few French fried potatoes and a slice of toast and a cup of coffee. I said, let's wait till we get back into Buffalo, and I said, we'll go over to the Busy Bee. It's a handsome place here, nice place. But it isn't of that variety and kind where they like to poke the prices on people who come in well-dressed. So we had dinner, and the dinner we had at the Busy Bee stood us $3.50 a piece. We enjoyed every morsel of it. Now you are living right next to that Mother Earth where those conditions are right in your lap. All you've got to do is to open the back door of your home, go out into the garden, pick a few tomatoes, a bunch of beans, this, that, and the other thing, and you are Bernard McFadden, the physical culturist of the world and the one that never believed in meat, only vegetation. And he was a smart man, but not smart enough in some things. Naturally, Bob, you are well fixed there on that ranch. I can recall the ranch that we had there at Hermosa, South Dakota. It was 120 acres, and it was well divided and fixed up. And we used to grow our own. We used to have our own beef. We used to have our own chicken, our own turkeys, and what more did we want? Out in the orchard, you could pick your apples and your fruit, your berries and the likes of that. Go out in the morning with a dish in your hand, fill it with elderberries, bring it back in and put your breakfast cereal with it and a little cream and love and eat it. Ella used to love to milk the cows. And we had plenty and plenty of good cream and milk. Now, Bob, you've spoken of that and cleared it about the weather. All those things are wonderful, and it is something that we cannot do about over there. You have to put up with it. You've got to find out what can be grown and had best in all kinds of weather. We had a wonderful garden in Hermosa, South Dakota. I'm sorry we ever sold that place. Well, anyway, now about your job, Bob. I'm glad that you are so concerned in, with, and about it. I'm glad that you feel that it is your future. And I hope your future will prove to be adequate enough to bring you the joys and the glories of a pleasant and a future life and living. I love to think of you, and I love to think of the progress that you are making. And I have great respect for granddaughter Lynn. She is willing to bend her elbows and get working too. And that's only natural of her interested in a dear mother. Now, Bob, you've spoken of your prospects on business. You haven't said a word about that foot of yours. And I'm concerned as much about that foot of yours at the present time as I would be at any in the past. I see it every day here. I know what it is, and I know what I'm talking about. It was only here the other day that our head matron, she come to me and she said, you know, I can't use my fingers the way I used to do. Now, she's only about 40 years of age, if she's that. She's a tall lady, 6'4" tall, built in proportion, and very active and kind and gentle and considerate. She said to me, I believe I'm getting arthritis. Well, I said, what are you doing about it? Well, she said, nothing at the present time. I says, that's your trouble, you're going to have it. It's there now. You should have gotten rid of it before. I spoke to her about physical therapy. And she immediately went out and got herself a rubber ball inflated with air. She punched a hole in that ball, made it pliable so it could be squeezed with the left hand. And now she's using that as physical therapy. I saw her just a little while ago. She was out on the lawn messing and getting the flower beds all prepared with new flowers. I said to her, Mildred, how's your hand this morning? She said, greatly improved, Herb. Well, I said, keep after that physical therapy. And so it must be did and done. You with that foot, don't neglect it one day, every day. I say every day, and if possible 3 or 4 times a day. Give it physical therapy. Now, we'll skip that. We'll go on to the next subject. The name of my father was Benjamin W-E-L-D-O-N, Weldon. And that's all I know about it. Now, regarding the Crumbs, there were 2 sisters, Ella Crumb and Mary Ann Crumb. Elda was the oldest, and she was about in line the age of Dexter Irons. Dexter Irons, in getting through with his education and single, took it upon himself to have a wife. And he took upon himself Ella Crumb. Thereby, she was then Ella Irons, I-R-O-N-S, Irons, named after the medical doctor, head of the AMA in these United States. Now, she still lived with her sister, Mary Ann Crumb. and they lived together. And while Dexter was operating the shipyard directly across the waters of the Connecticut River from the Coast Guard, they managed to provide the cooking and called the help that was needed. They were at that time building a dock in which to build rowboats, speedboats, and sailboats. That got monotonous to Grandfather Dexter Ryan's, and he turned around and he began to develop larger ships, 1 mast, 2 mast, 3 mast, 4 mast. Lumber was cheap at that time and easily available to be had. And those that had to work it, or those that would work and put in a good day's work, maybe 12 hours a day. And they didn't receive a fortune for their services either. Being affiliated with the Mallory people who operate the Mallory steamship people that run down into Galveston, Texas right now, he used to borrow from time to time the needed help that they will require on certain specifics that had to be done on the building of a craft. Ella Crum, finally, Mrs. Ella Irons, passed away. And I believe she passed away from an ailment of a fever of something that had developed. That is in the Bible, and I do not have the Bible. Therefore, Dexter Irons, in turn, turned around and married Mary A. Crum, who became Mary A. Irons, I-R-O-N-S. And Mary A. Irons brought forth my dear loving mother, Annie E. Dixon. Now that's the story of it. Mother knew the shipyard and knew pretty near all the workers of the shipyard. Now when Dexter Irons passed away, after making that elaborate and famous trip around Cape Horn from Boston up the Pacific coast to San Francisco with a cargo, in which he defeated and made a better record in traveling than the Yankee Clipper, which laid the cable across the Atlantic Ocean. Mother used to speak considerable about the way of living it was there at the shipyard. She said the men seemed to be so gentle and so kind and nice. And well, in the meantime, Mother was married. And when they married, they lived up in Boston, Mass. She married Benjamin Weldon Dixon. They operated an ice cream and a confectionery store there at Bunker Hill. When that terminated, I do not know. It's all in the Bible. Everything that I can speak of, the results is in the Bible. I hope someday to get that Bible, and if I ever do, Bob, you will see it, and you will see my mother and my grandmother's writing in the Bible, which is a fairly good writing for people at that time. Mother used to keep a record of everything that she did and done, and everything was preserved, the same as their own life and living. Now enough for that at the present time. Helen was here for a period of 2.5 days. She brought Niels in from Green Valley, Arizona. He had to be back at the school where he works. He has a job there, received pay for it, not much money, but it's his home, it's his future, and he'll be buried right there in that spot at Lander, Wyoming. So Helen came here to visit with me, to go to the cemetery, to see grandmother's grave. Soon. It did not give me the 14.5-minute time. Nevertheless, I will continue. I was speaking, I believe, of mother's condition. Well, poor mother, she passed away on July the 8th, 1936, and was buried at Elm Grove Cemetery, the cemetery that my grandfather Dexter Islands gave to the state of Connecticut, and it was then known as the Mallory Irons burial plot. All of mother's family is buried in there, and I saw it behind ornamental iron fencing. I believe there's something like 14 in it. Nevertheless, that is completed. And I go forth now to elaborate a little bit on what you said you would like to know something about and of. Well, naturally, Bob, you knew that I was in the island of Cuba doing military work after my induction into industry. The war came about, and Mother said to me, it's time for you to go and do something for your country, Bert. So off I went and packed. I went into the service, served in Cuba. San Juan, Santiago de Cuba, Cienfuegos, Pino Rivera, and all those places. I came back, and in coming back, I was transported across country to Presidio San Francisco, where there it prepared me for the duties to cross the Pacific Ocean by steamer. And it took 33 days for me to travel across those Pacifics. We stopped at Honolulu 3 days. There we coaled ship to take the balance of the trip from Honolulu to Manila. Naturally, we went into and saw Queen Lil's palace and saw all that was going on in around that Honolulu site that was present at that time. It's a different place today. I've seen it 4 times since. Nevertheless, we got to the Philippine Islands, and there we terminated and done our military duty in the cavalry all over the island of Luzon. We did make a trip down to Mindanao in helping our colored outfit, the 9th Cavalry, to do a job that they were unable to do and complete. We returned back to the island of Luzon, and having cleaned and swept that island pretty thoroughly from one end to the other, they decided it was time enough for us to come back to the United States and to find out what we were going to do then and there, be discharged or take a re-enlist and take a bonus. I naturally came back with the other boys. Some didn't come back. Some stayed over there in the islands and began working for the post office department, sorting mail and the likes of that. Well, so much for that. We got back home. I went home on a 3-month furlough. I took $300 bonus for re-enlisting, and to re-enlist into the service to retain my old rank that I had in the islands. And that was under OTC, the Officers Training Corps. I was then ranked and not discharged as yet as an officer of the military. I had to be first take that examination in Philadelphia. And the time for taking that examination hardly ever came about. I never knew of it until later on, around 1906. I got a notice from the War Department that I was to proceed to Philadelphia and there to take the officers' training examination. Well, I only going as far as 3rd grade in grade school. I never felt myself qualified, able, mathematically, historically, geography, or in any other way, of getting through such a thing as a military examination. Naturally, it was just about the time that I became acquainted with your grandmother, now deceased. It was at Fort Des Moines, following the World's Fair at St. Louis in 1904. After the fair and our services there, we were returned to Fort Des Moines, Iowa, which had been occupied at that time by the 9th Cavalry, a colored outfit. They wrecked the town, they ruined the base, they did everything. So we took over, and it was our job to straighten the thing out. I started in working as a major, OTC, Officers Training Corps. I passed all the needed requirements of examination to retain that until further examination in Philadelphia. It happened to be one day, I believe it was the early part of 1905, when I was on the veranda of the barracks, and I had just left the first sergeant's orderly room and was returning to headquarters, when along come two ladies. Now here's where the beginning of Ella Gladfelty Dixon takes place. As I was standing on the porch, these two ladies come by, naturally, wavy hair down to their waistlines, smiling and giggling and talking. Well, I happened to see it. I happened to go down the steps, and as I got to the sidewalk path, I paused for a moment, and along came the two ladies. I looked up and I said to one of them, "Lady," I says, "what's the idea of you wearing a blue bandana around your beautiful black hair?" "Well," she says, "I don't want my hair to blow all over my face, and I want to kind of keep it where I've combed it to be kept." Well, I said, "Young lady, do you realize that you're in a cavalry post now? That ribbon should never be blue. It should be the yellow ribbon." Well, you know, Bob, that took hold right then and there. The next day I saw her, Ella Gladfelty had a yellow bandana around her forehead to keep and train her hair. Well, those things and conditions at that time brought back pleasant moments. We enjoyed everything. We used to go to dances that we'd have at the barracks, and we used to have a heck of a good time. Well, I thought to myself, as long as I'm here and messing around, I said, she's a girl, and I said, I'm still single. I said, I'd nothing better than to go back home and have a wife with me. So in 1905, I proposed to her. She was then cooking for the Colonel Thomas, head of the base at Fort Des Moines, Iowa. I asked the colonel for permission to marry Ella, and he said, "You mean my cook?" I says, "I guess that's the one, Colonel." "Well," he says, "Dixon," he says, "you go right ahead." He says, "More power to you. I'll consent that marriage, and I'm glad that you come into the office to go through it in a military manner." Well, that was it. Things kept going on. I became a constructing quartermaster, working for the government, and I constructed with the quartermaster of the post the target range, consisting of rectangular frames for the carbine and pistol shots. Also the target range for the mounted silhouettes, man laying down, man standing up, and a man riding the horse on back. And another range for the manipulation of the saber, cutting at heads, and so on and so forth. It was a pleasant beginning. Well, the time finally come along, and I thought to myself, July the 17th, 1905 would be the day of our wedding, and it was. And not long after that, well, September the 2nd, 1906, along came that lovable dear soul, Helen. Now, I wasn't there at that time. Just before that time, I was slated to go to San Francisco in April 1906 with the regiment for duty at the earthquake conditions in San Francisco. But it turned out to be that the damage done there was not quite as extensive as they had planned it to be. And instead of being at San Francisco, I was in Fort Riley, Kansas with the outfit, and during my first 3 days at Fort Riley, Kansas, along came the Miss Helen Dixon. Well, I was greatly pleased and satisfied, and then come the order, the Army of Pacification, back to Des Moines, Iowa. Take the horses and all and get back to Cuba to teach those fellows in Cuba the differences between roughness and manhood. And we did that and did it nicely. And I felt that in 1907, the 13th day of July 1907, it was time for me to quit the service and to go back to Ella and to the daughter. And so I went back. I took my discharges at Fortress Monroe, Virginia. I boarded a D&O train, and I went to Pennsylvania. There in Pennsylvania at Osina, I met my dear wife, Ella Gladfelty Dixon, and that lovely soul, Helen. It was indeed a wonderful meeting. Well, we were so pleased together with grandmother there. I made hay, stacked it away in the barn. Ella used to milk the cows. I done all the chores around the place. I'd go to town, not on one of the old team horses or something, get to down and come back. It was a wonderful enlistment all the way through, regardless of what the outcome was. I finally took my discharge and was discharged as a first sergeant. I was grateful and thankful for that. I never took the examination for commission. As I said before, I didn't think that I had the backbone and the knowledge and the education to take an examination and to meet with success. I wanted no part of it, for I would have to turn around and say, well, there it is, he took the examination and flunked, and that wasn't to be. So I just simply abandoned the idea and took into myself civil work, working on the outside. I waited around for a while, and then I became the personal director of the old Metropolitan Street Railway Company, operating all over the island of Manhattan, and all of the roads, the West Belt, the East Belt, the 9th, the 8th, the 7th, the 6th, the Park Avenue, Lexington Avenue, 3rd Avenue, 2nd Avenue, 1st Avenue, Carl's Circle, and all the cross-town lines from the Battery up to 125th Street in the Bronx. It was a wild and a wonderful pastime, and that is where I became poisoned, and I quit the job, and then I went to work for Billy Lyle, the cotton king of the world, at an industry I never knew what cotton was until I got into it. I think this tape is about ready to flump and go out. So, Bob, I'll call this. To my grandson, Robert Warren, and to my granddaughter, Lynn, to my